To BizTech's ASEAN Midday Market Watch. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank in Singapore. Happy Monday, Vishnu.
Happy Monday, Brian. It's a great way to start the week.
Well, a great way to start the week. The markets, however, are not that great. But let's first take a look at the crypto markets and then go across the regional markets. Now, we start with the crypto markets. Bitcoin is at under 40,000 again. It had a rally over the weekend. It's 39,766, down 5.47%. Ethereum is at 2,560. It's down 2.31%. It's been running up for quite a while, but it's now down 2.31%. Closer to home, we have Bursa Malaysia's FBM KLCI, which is under the 1,500 mark. It's 1,488.19. It's down 0.43. The SGX Straits Times Index is at 3,157.04. It's down 0.31% across the region. However, it's a sea of green. So the Nikkei is up almost 2%, 27,818.92. It's up 1.96%. Shanghai Composite is up 1.5% at 3,448.31. The Hang Seng is up 0.92% at 26,198.65. And rounding up the numbers, we've got the ASX 200, which is at 7,493.9. It's up 1.37%. Now, Vishnu, what's your take on how markets have performed? It's a mixed bag. So you've got Malaysia and Singapore, which is in negative territory, but the rest of ASEAN and Australia are pretty much up. Rest of Asia, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaways are the risks are not out of the picture yet. So it's not like it's all clear, break out the champagne mode type of markets, but equally markets are taking relief wherever they can. And I think in the case of Hang Seng, China, there's probably some hopes that the CSRC, the China's securities regulatory body, is extending the olive branch to markets insofar that it wants to speak with the SEC, it wants to watch the worst of fears, so on and so forth. Malaysia, you probably know the story better than me. I think political uncertainty is not going to do it any favors, even if some of the China risks take a back seat. And I think that's the biggest distinction, though. Today is somewhat more about getting some consolation from earnings, taking a back seat in terms of the worst risks, but none of these risks are in the rear view mirror because I think there's still a lot of unknowns around China's regulatory crackdown and which one would be the next domino to fall, so to speak.
And so investors are basically taking the view, Vishnu, that until we have some clarity, let's stay away.
Yes, and depending on how you dice up today's markets, is either no news is good news or hit and run, and then we'll see. We'll try to get out of the way before we get more news flow out of China. But yes, I think on a more serious note, you make a good point about clarity because markets are trying to wrap their heads around things that they can, they can either extend or project. In terms of Fed policy, so on and so forth. So last week's dovish FOMC was supposed to be a booster for markets, but completely opaque China regulatory crackdown with some mixed signaling. The silver lining is that in the mixed signaling, they're taking consolation wherever they can. But the trouble is, no one's sure what the next move would be, whether it's towards more hawkish tightening or it's towards relaxations to support the markets. But let's bear in mind that there are two big conflicting thoughts around China. One was the we did have the Chinese policymakers in the major meeting that they had last week Friday coming out to say they want to take a step back from campaign type of goals with regards to green and carbon and so on and so forth. So I think markets are taking some consolation that they will not crack down on carbon standards, so on. And whatever else that could dampen economic growth. But at the same time, their take on social risks and financial risks, that's a totally different ball game. And the pain threshold appears to be higher. No one knows.
Now, on a different note and closer to home, ASEAN is under the microscope at the moment because, as you just mentioned, Malaysia is under the microscope because of political uncertainty, but also the COVID situation. Could you kind of unpack all the issues around the mounting challenges in ASEAN?
I think we've gone into this phase of rolling ASEAN risks around COVID and politics on very very different dimensions. So what started off as just lagging in terms of vaccine procurement, but rather high standards of containment, somehow has descended into haphazard containment. With the Delta variant, because it's a different ball game altogether, wreaking quite a bit of havoc, and the vaccinations lagging quite a bit, which means ASEAN is now a sore thumb because they're exposed to far greater Delta outbreaks than anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
If once we adjust for population, so on and so forth, and also the road to, if such a thing exists, so I'm talking about a unicorn here, the herd immunity thing, if that even exists, the road there is going to be a lot longer for ASEAN. So in the meantime, a lot of uncertainty seep in. But then ASEAN also appears to be steeped in political risks. Let's not forget Myanmar. Perhaps the apex of both risks, both COVID and political uncertainty. But we also have various versions of that rolling out in other parts of ASEAN. So we've got street protests starting again in Thailand, despite very high outbreaks. So that's certainly a worrying situation. And the political upheaval in Malaysia means, at least for investors watching this, putting aside the how this process is fraught in terms of arriving at a stable political outcome. In the meantime, the fear is that the response to COVID might be muddled because politicians do what's politically convenient, but not quite right. What's not quite what's needed to arrest this healthcare and cascading economic problem, because the last function of this risk is, as the developed world starts to tear itself away from the COVID crisis into the recovery. We did see very strong Eurozone numbers coming out as well. What then becomes a very big risk is credit rating agencies looking across. Well, say, hang on a relative basis, credit metrics in ASEAN have deteriorated, and they don't appear to be on track to recover at the same speed. So for them, it may be expeditious to take negative action. So again, if you look at the runway of risks, ASEAN has got quite a few stumbling blocks getting into 2022.
Now, Vishnu, on a most positive note then, looking ahead this week, what are the key events and data points that we should look out for that will move markets?
I think heading into this week, and thank you, Brian, for reminding me to be positive, because it's quite easy to get really miserable about things. We've got quite a few things that policymakers in the region will be looking at. I think those down under, let's start right down under. RBA will be watched very closely, given the conspiracy of factors that have started clouding the environment. So the extended lockdowns now affecting Brisbane as well, not just Greater Sydney and Melbourne. That's one thing that's going to be weighing on the RBA's mind. The other thing, of course, is China just slapped export tariffs on iron ore. Not on iron ore, on their steel produced. So that means iron ore prices have taken a hammering. And the RBA must factor this in and taking a view that fiscal support in the economy is going to start to fade. So that leaves the RBA with some thinking to do. But because they just extended the QE and YCC, they need not act immediately. But it'll be very interesting to hear what they've got to say and whether they have anything else to say about a weak Aussie. And staying with central banks, the Bank of Thailand is up next, because as far as the Bank of Thailand is concerned, in stark contrast to their position in 2018 and 2019, now they're worried about a weak baht. And let's not forget that as sympathetic as the US may be to the position of ASEAN struggling with COVID, they may not take a very kind view to the Thai baht. Remember, Thailand is already on the monitoring list.
Yes.
So a weak Thai baht without countervailing action from the BOT could increase diplomatic pain on top of the political pain, on top of the COVID pain and the tourism pain. So BOT's stance on it, whether anything is communicated for the international investor audience, as well as the domestic economy, those things will be quite interesting to see. And we've got a central bank bonanza. So the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, meets as well. We think they'll hold, but it'll be interesting to watch what the RBI has to say about sticky and elevated inflation, which means that even though India's risks from COVID have faded, the third wave risk is something that I think the RBI will consider, and how much they can balance between inflation and accommodation is something that's going to be perhaps something for the rest of ASEAN to watch. Indonesia is releasing Q2 GDP. The numbers will look okay because we've got a very low base effect, but it speaks nothing of the forward-looking risks to do with COVID, and I think that nothing should distract from that. So those are probably the main things to watch in this part of the world. Nobody can really take their eyes off the US or China in any way. So infrastructure things in the US, China on further regulations, touch wood, or at least clarity on things, hopefully, those will also remain there. And for those who are still continuing to watch the Olympics after the blue ribbon events, I think there will be some lighter moments, but that's about all that we have. As unexpected as this whole year has been, I think that has been represented in the Olympics as well, with Jamaica not featuring in the 100-meter sprint, right?
Yeah. Well, Vishnu, on that note, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
My pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank on BizTech's ASEAN Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out www.biztech.asia for business and technology conversations. Please, this video will be on our Facebook and LinkedIn sites as well as our website. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.